Hi, and welcome to the 47th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the creator of TiddlyWiki, and I'm joined today by Mario. Would you like to say hi and where you're from?
Hi folks, my name is Mario Peach. I'm from Austria, near Salzburg, contributor to TiddlyWiki Classic and TiddlyWiki 5.
Indeed, great to have you here, Mario. And a new face for the Hangouts, but not a new face for me. Paul, would you like to say hi and where you're from and your involvement with TiddlyWiki?
Sure, man. Hi, I'm Paul Reiber. I live in Silicon Valley in California. My involvement with TiddlyWikis goes way back. One of the very earliest versions of TiddlyWiki that Jeremy ever shared with the rest of the world caught my attention, and I started screwing around with it, and I've introduced friends to it and such over very many years. So I've been kind of a backseat driver and, smack people on the head kind of a guy when it comes to where's it going to go next and who's going to do what with it and such like that. I've been having a lot of fun using TiddlyWiki for various business uses, delivering content to major corporations in their inboxes in TiddlyWiki form so that they could peruse the data and such that was just collected from last night's run of some QA test, for example. So it's an interesting file format for me. It's also recently proven to be pretty useful for tablets, so I'm kind of excited on that angle.
Cool, Paul. Well, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And finally, Stephan, would you like to say hi and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Stephan Radek, and I hope I can be here or heard. So,
you can, yes.
I'm from Germany. I contributed a bit to TiddlyWiki 5, and now I lost a bit track for, I think, 4 versions or so, and trying to catch up again.
Oh dear. We must see if we can help you with that. One thing, Paul, as a new attendee at the Hangouts, one of the most popular things that people do is show the kind of private TiddlyWiki uses that they couldn't post normally on the web. So we've had a number of occasions where people have been kind enough to show their, their personal TiddlyWiki files bulging with thousands of tiddlers. And of course, that's always interesting to people, say partly because it's the stuff that you can't normally share, and because we endlessly find there's so much to be learned from each other in terms of getting the best out of the tool. So if you do have anything to hand that you could show that you think might be interesting, that would be cool. I guess you can't probably do. Can you do Hangouts from your Chrome tablet to show?
From the tablet? I may be able to do that, but I also have Dropbox on my PC here, so I may be able to pull up the exact same TiddlyWiki. Should be able to pull up that empty at least. But it's kind of the opposite of what you were asking for, which was like I have a TiddlyWiki with one tiddler that was actually created via my tablet, which is and this has been the challenge with TiddlyWiki is write privs, right? So and that's been what has been stubbed my toe everywhere that I've gone with TiddlyWiki is how do you save a tiddler, so it's always been, well, you can go server side, but when you do want to do something that's local, does it really work? Does it stay sufficiently local?
Remarkably, I recently heard from somebody who uses a Chromebook, and they use TiddlyWiki 5 regularly on it, and they use the default download saver, which I would have thought to be far too inconvenient. So that is that they load up their TiddlyWiki, they make changes to it. From time to time, they press the download button, they get, I believe, a prompt that then requires them to confirm the file save, and then they do a refresh. But I was really interested that, of course, the reason why it's worth it for them is because, given a Chromebook, they've got very few other viable options that'll work that way. And although it sounds a bit inconvenient, it's the kind of the saving operation. It is at least the kind of manual jiggery-pokery that one's muscle memory can learn quite effectively. And once you're in the habit of click, clunk, press every time you make a change, as we learn.
I'm more the autosave guy.
Oh yeah, no, likewise.
You know,
I mean,
when I hit done, I expect it to be saved somewhere. You know?
Well, no, that's rather the source of my surprise, because when I use TiddlyWiki, I use it in Firefox with TiddlyFox, or I use TiddlyDesktop, and I wouldn't trust myself to reliably save changes every time that I should. But as I say, it's pretty interesting that it's still, for all of the inconvenience of that approach, it's still a viable way to work. And that was very much my hope with TiddlyWiki 5, was that we could establish a baseline that would work on essentially all HTML5 compatible browsers. And in fact, it does pretty much. The only place that download technique doesn't work well is on iOS, obviously, because of it exposing the file system.
Well, I'm really interested in getting TiddlyWiki 5 to work with the same technique here. I don't really know how to do the screen share thing, but I do have a tab in my browser that has that empty TiddlyWiki, and it's really just sort of pointless. But I could show you an empty TiddlyWiki with one tiddler in it that actually went through.
On the left-hand side of your Hangouts window, the second button down should be a green screen with a white arrow in it, and if you click that, you should be able to then select which screen to share.
And I assume it should be this one here, and then I'll just switch tabs. Start screen share. Does that get nice and recursive?
It does frequently do it's crazy. No, but in fact it's just worked. Correct.
So, do you see a TiddlyWiki?
We do, yes.
So, yesterday, with Eric's help, I won't actually pat myself on the back for this, but we were able to pull down the classic TiddlyWiki empty and put it on Dropbox, and then get the right URLs and such. Now, I don't think that this URL right here would work, the file : / through the Dropbox, although it might.
No, I haven't tried it. You have to browse to it from within the Dropbox app.
Right. So, there's still some challenges, and it may well be, what if I did this here from now? No, it opened it. Okay. But anyways, this was this Android Chrome Dropbox Tiddler 1 was, I went into that empty and I put my name in, and then I created a new tiddler testing 1, 2, 3, and there it was, and it actually was able to save via save changes there on the right. First time through, which was the way more than I had ever hit on my own. So I don't even know. Part of it for me is what does what are the right steps to even do to get to something that'll work on a tablet? We went down this path with Eric and we got there. But
the other viable approach on the tablet would be to use, if you can, Firefox for Android, because TiddlyFox runs on Firefox for Android, so you can just save in the same way that you would with desktop Firefox.
Now that's an interesting option to use a different browser on the Android instead of Chrome.
Somebody very kindly sent me a Nexus 7 for me to have a play with. And my conclusion was that it was so easy to get things working on Firefox that it was embarrassing, and so impossibly difficult to get things working on Chrome that it was also embarrassing.
Well, that's why the word Chrome got actually into the Tiddler name here, because wait, that one actually works now. But I think that may be another option is going forward is just using Firefox.
If you can, it's definitely.
So is Firefox working with TW5?
Yes, it works. TW5 works with TiddlyFox. But the trouble is that Chrome will never be able to do a decent extension for Chrome, because all that Firefox gives Chrome extensions access to is a sandbox private file system, and they don't get the ability to load and save files from arbitrary places in the file system. So it basically means that we'd have a little kind of mini sandbox within TiddlyWiki that you would be able to save your files to, and then you'd have to kind of export them to put them on an SD card or do anything useful with them. So I've not bothered with it because I think there's so many. Oh, my microphone's. Oh no, that's. I've not bothered with doing it because I just don't think it's worth it. And especially given that the neat thing about the Dropbox solution is, of course, that it fills in many, many, many other scenarios that would otherwise be impossible.
I think the challenge here though is still like okay, this is a perfect example. I just pulled up this document using a file / URL in Dropbox on another machine, and and as a regular user, I would expect I could just hit new tiddler and it'll work. Maybe it will. I don't know. I don't think it will, but
no, well, it will. If you really want to save it at that point, you can save your changes. But it's just, it's really simple. Chrome doesn't go well with TiddlyWiki.
Downloading, saving main TiddlyWiki file. So it used a download.
Yeah. So then you'd and so to make that convenient, you'd set Chrome to prompt you for the location of each downloaded file, and then when you click that link, it would automatically bring up a file prompt so that you can select the old file and say replace.
And I don't know why it's asking about Java either right here. This is odd.
The TiddlyWiki Classic it tries to load the Java applet by default if it's there in the same folder. So you must have a tiddlysaver.jar and by default with Classic it downloads the tiddlysaver.jar in the same folder that contains your empty HTML file.
Right. Yeah, there's just so many. I've got so many little pieces of stuff laying around. I'm not surprised. if I could just stamp legacy on my forehead. All right, so I'm gonna. That's really all I've got to share is the fact that actually worked, which for me was like impressive as hell.
No, it's good. I think the best we can hope for with TiddlyWiki is to have some browsers and some operating systems with a great experience, but to try to fill in the long tail with a reasonable fallback experience so that people can operate in Chrome if they need to. Because I still think there's a lot, but a lot of the time we all work on our own machines that we have the luxury to set up as we want, and we can load extensions and so on. But the ability to be able to work on somebody else's machine in extremis, I think, is very handy.
So let me ask you a question. So years back, I used something like Ginsu or so, I forget what the terms were, but to create a TiddlyWiki document.
In TiddlyWiki 5 land, you use TiddlyWiki 5 under Node.js.
So like if I have a handful of directories with text files in them, and I want to wrap all those text files in a little bit of whatever it takes to make them all into tiddlers,
you'd use the Node edition for that.
Okay.
And the Node edition, what it wants is .tid files, which are files that have the additional TiddlyWiki metadata fields. But you'll see examples of that in the repo.
Okay.
Danielo, hello. How are you? Microphoneless for a moment, I think. Well, glad you could join us, Danielo. Do say hi when you get a chance. What I just might do now quickly then is screen share here and show you the little list of things that I've got for today's Hangout. So one of them was, the simple one, was plans for 5.013. So we obviously had an emergency release of 5.012 just before I went on holiday at the end of previous week, which disturbed our numbering system. But the next big release will be 5.013. There's a couple of things I've jotted down that I'm trying to get done for it. These four are all rather grouped together. It's the aim is to refactor the parsing mechanism, and if you've looked at the inwardness of it, you'll know that there's a couple of hacks left over from a refactoring last year, I think 2013, that really needs to be fixed up. And in the process, I intend to fix 3 other things, making a final decision about the regular expression that triggers wiki links. So, Mario, you've been involved in this, but there's been a lot of debate about overly enthusiastic linking of words, particularly that crop up, I think, in German easily. Yeah. So what I intend to do is to revert to a much more conservative regular expression that errs on the side of not making things into links, on the basis that it is generally easier to make something into a link than it is to unmake something that's been automatically linked, if you see what I mean. The GFM line breaks, that's GitHub flavored markdown, and the issue there is that in TiddlyWiki at the moment, if I do something like this, you get the same effect as in HTML, where it just treats the new lines as white space and not specifically as a line break. And in GitHub flavored markdown, they've modified, extended standard markdown behavior so that a single line break generates a BR tag. So at the moment in TiddlyWiki 5, if one actually wanted something like this on separate lines, one would manually put in those line breaks. And the change that's under consideration is to automatically insert those line breaks each time we encounter a single line break. So it'll be a breaking change, and it may yet be that when I start exploring it properly, we realize that it significantly breaks. And yeah, I mean, I can imagine figuring that it's too late to make the change. In fact,
I don't think so, because people really expect it that way. Even if, as Stephan wrote somewhere, in normal cases, if you have bigger text, there should be no formatting.
But it's the complexity is very difficult. Look at that. Yeah. A div followed by a div. Do you really want a BR there? Probably not. So the rules that we need to get this so that the BRs go in the expected places and not in other places are non-trivial. And if we just blindly convert each single line break into a BR, it will not work.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because now HTML syntax is allowed. Yeah, you're right. Okay, that will have a problem.
So do anticipate difficulties, but intend to make it work if I can.
Yeah.
So that GFM thing is one thing. Oh, and global macros. So my intention at the moment is to do that via an import directive. And for the import directive, you'd be able to say things like that to import all of the macros in all of the tiddlers that carry a particular tag. So in fact, the page template will gain an import statement like that, an import directive like that to actually import the global macros.
Yeah, but do you need this in every tiddler then? No.
If you know, it'll be in the page template, and so by virtue of being in the page template, anything imported there is available in all of the tiddlers transcluded by the page template, which is ordinarily everything, obviously. So that's the hope. That will, and that'll significantly reduce the number of outstanding breaking changes. There are some other bits of refactoring that I'm keen to do, but they don't have, for the most part, they don't have any, they wouldn't make any change to them, wouldn't make any externally visible change, wouldn't break any existing content. And the final one I've got jotted down here is fixing up the MIME type with tank, which I think you've probably been following that discussion, Mario. I'm not sure anybody else.
It is application JSON, this stuff.
Yeah, and it's just putting the conditional test in. So I think that's probably reasonable to do the the things that need doing that are getting reported at the moment, and focus on the parser refactoring. And with any luck, I'll try and turn this around slightly quicker than some of the previous releases, but we'll see how that goes. Is there anything else that anybody would particularly like to see aiming for 5.013?
I would like to have... Yes.
I did read your mind, right?
Yes, mine.
Which yeah, in fact, I couldn't quite hear what you're saying. Were you saying environment variables?
Yes.
Ah, great. So the environment variable stuff, yes, I think it's okay. The bit I'm a bit worried about, though, is the way that environment variables, or perhaps I don't understand environment variables, but aren't they global? So would it be possible?
No, they are not global. They are shell specific.
Yeah.
At least talking about OS X and Linux.
So if I set the variable, if I open a command prompt, set the value of an environment variable, and then inspect it, and then close that command prompt, you'd expect that environment variable to disappear along with the command prompt.
Yes.
Except if you do an export. So you can say
even if you do an export, you have to do the export just for this shell. If you want to have it in every shell, you have to set it in your initialization scripts for the shells.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh well, that's fine. That then deals with my concern. So I will.
Is this similar in Windows? I don't think so.
Yeah, forget about Windows.
Well, I tell you for now, I think with Windows, don't people use PowerShell? I mean, I know it's. I don't know whether it comes with Windows.
Yes, it comes with Windows, but yeah, it is quite powerful. But I think everyone which started with DOS still uses the old CMD.
Okay.
I have to use Windows for work now, and I also use the PowerShell or even Cygwin.
Oh yes.
Jeremy, Tom joined.
Oh, awesome. Tom, hello. Welcome. How are you doing?
Hi. I'm fine. Hi, guys.
Hello. Hi. Would you like to introduce yourself and say where you're from?
Okay. I'm Ton Gerner from the Netherlands, long-time user of TiddlyWiki, and about a half year is TiddlyWiki 5.
Indeed. It's great to have you here, Ton. Danielo, are you able to say hello now?
Yeah, hello everybody.
Hi, good to see you. Glad you could join us again.
I was away because work, but now I'm in a more stable situation.
Good, glad to hear it. Well, I was away last week because of holidays, which is an even better reason for being away. But sadly, I'm back to work now, which is never quite as nice.
Question about the environment variables. Which is the use case for environment variables?
So the issue, let me bring up the ticket because it's worth referring to it. The issue is that at the moment, all of the plugins and themes and indeed additions that you want to use have to either be inside the TW5 repo itself, which is really, we'd consider that to be part of the core, which most people shouldn't need to modify, or you have to include the plugins themes within an individual wiki folder. So by providing a search order, what it means is that you'd be able to set up a folder on your computer somewhere that's your own, basically your own personal plugin library, and then reference it from any TiddlyWiki that you build. So it'll only, I can't remember, Danielo, I don't think you run TiddlyWiki under Node, do you? I think you work in the browser.
Actually, I started. I just installed the Node.js, and I'm using it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. In that case, this stuff will be highly relevant. You will have, in the ticket that I've got open here, you can see that Mario has been patiently trying to explain to Stephan and others how to set up a fork of the TiddlyWiki repo so that you can develop your own plugins and so that you're able to submit them as change requests to the core if you want to, or keep them as separate plugins. So I think once we do this environment variable modification, then some equivalent of this documentation needs to appear on tiddlywiki.com, just telling people how to set, the recommended way of setting things up.
Yep. I think if we have the environment variables, the setting will be easier.
Yeah.
So this is the description of the way I do it at the moment. It has some advantages to do it that way, but in normal cases, it's very error prone because if you change, one moment, because if you change your branch with Git, then the links are gone in normal cases. And then you can't compile anymore and all this stuff. So switching branches is a little bit complicated and error prone.
Right, that's a big problem.
Yeah, so that's a little problem here. The advantage is that the editor can make global search because it searches the whole directory structure.
Yeah.
So, so there are some advantages and some disadvantages.
Yeah, well, I think there'll always be some variations in the way that people choose to set things up, I guess.
Yes.
Depending on whether they see themselves contributing.
It will be different for everyone. So that's why if we have the environment variables, everyone can set their paths like they want, and then it should work.
So the only other thing that I think we did discuss this before once, but the other kind of candidate way of solving this problem would be to use a resolution technique like node modules do. And in fact, we could even reuse node modules. So you're familiar, I guess, with the search conventions that Node does when it loads a module.
Yes, but then you have, in normal cases, you have to upload your module to the repository, right?
Right, but we wouldn't need to. I mean, in order to Node, I'm talking about Node here and not NPM. So all Node cares about is walking back up the directory tree, looking for folders called node_modules. So we could walk up the directory tree looking for folders called TiddlyWiki plugins, TiddlyWiki editions, etc. Is the other approach I can think of. But I think at the moment, my view is that what we're trying to do here is to make TiddlyWiki more accessible to people who are familiar with command scripts. I think, that's the purpose. That's the and environment variables seem more flexible from a general terminal scripting point of view than the Node approach.
Yeah, and also in my directory structure, it wouldn't help to walk up the directory tree because you have to walk up and down back into another branch.
And I think I think you'd end up with symlinks still, in fact.
But then you have the problems that symlinks won't work with Windows. So
symlinks are a terrible solution, and nested repos are a terrible solution. Unfortunately, it would be great if it worked.
So that's why we have to have something that also works with Windows, because otherwise symlinks would be okay.
So I think that one's fine. Don't foresee any difficulties with doing that. another ticket that's under discussion is more interesting than it first appears. Is this ticket from IreneKnapp. Now, what's going on here is that she's trying to make TiddlyWiki work better in multi-user scenarios under TiddlySpot, which is quite an interesting case. And in the with TiddlySpot, what happens is that we have a magic tiddler called status username, and if I put my name in that tiddler, then each time I edit a tiddler, it'll get given that username, which is marvelous, except that in the TiddlySpot case, that tiddler is saved along with the wiki. So that means that when I reload the wiki after somebody else has modified it, the username will be wrong, and I'll need to change it. I'll need to remember to change it before I make my changes. So we solved that problem in TiddlyWiki Classic by storing the username in a cookie. This time around, I am trying to avoid cookies for various reasons. I mean, partly because I think they're kind of obsolete, and they're not really. We were using them, you know, for local storage within the browser, but that's not really what they're particularly. They're not really the right tool for that job. So. And I was also had concerns about yeah, no, let's leave that there. But so the problem we've got in TiddlyWiki 5 is that we're not going to use cookies for this. So Irene's suggestion is pretty elegant. It's to reuse the mechanism we've got for password storage. So right now, passwords are stored in local storage. Sorry, I say passwords. I should just stipulate I'm just talking here about the TiddlySpot password. So this isn't a secure way of keeping a password. This is because it's stored in plain text in local storage. So kind of like a cookie. It's a what's the word? Yeah, there's a trade-off. You know, if you want your password remembered locally, then it's not going to be secure. So anyway, Irene's extended the mechanism so that instead of just storing passwords, it can store browser variables, named browser variables. And then we've got a new widget called browser variable that's exactly like the password widget, except that it writes to an arbitrary browser variable and modifies that browser variable. And then you can see down here, when we modify a tiddler, instead of always making the creator be the name stored in the tiddler, well, with username title, which is up there somewhere, we now first try to look for a username in local storage or as a browser variable, and only if that isn't present do we fall back to the username in the tiddler. So that's actually the main problem I have with it at the moment, is that it now means that there are two places where the username for signing edits can be set, and that seems confusing. Irene's modified the control panel so that it gives you access to the browser variable username, but at the same time she's suppressed the ability to edit the username tiddler, which is a reasonable thing to do because it keeps control panel simpler, but you know, at the expense of losing a piece of UI that is needed in other scenarios. So it's definitely a problem. It's definitely something we need to fix. As ever with TiddlyWiki, there's a question as to the right balance between a kind of you know, a hack to fix it, something quick and dirty that'll bias the necessary capabilities, versus doing something that's more generic and more and will help us solve other problems. So in the discussion, I've introduced the idea that, in fact, Irene also noted, which is the idea of using local storage as a kind of Irene states it well. It would be possible to extend the browser variable widget to store into the first place available. That is either into browser local storage or into a tiddler. So there she's talking about the browser variable widget knowing the right place to write its value. What I'm suggesting is that we explore an even more ambitious approach, which is to make it so that certain tiddlers, instead of being saved and synchronized in the normal way, are just stored locally to local storage. So the changes that would happen would be it's pretty much listed here. That first we'd suppress these per user tiddlers from syncing and saving, and we've already got the facility to do that. There's a filter that determines whether which tiddlers are included. Then we'd need to modify the core add tiddler so that we mirror updates to these magic tiddlers to local storage. And at startup, we'd need to look in local storage for any local modifications that we need to apply. So
Jeremy, the local storage, is this per TiddlyWiki, per file TiddlyWiki, or is this per
by local storage, I mean the browser's local storage API. So
is there a connection between domains? So if you have
yes, there is. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So if I looking at my local storage here, that GitHub seems to put a whole load of stuff in there. Goodness knows what all those are. Oh, they're things I've searched for, are they? I'm not sure. But yes, the downside of local storage is it's shared in all file URIs. So here I'm on index.html, and in here there's a password set. There's no easy. Oh yeah, look, if I do an inspect element. So the password is tw5 test. Okay, I'll add a 2 to the beginning of it. So it's now 2 tw5 test, and now I'll navigate to empty.html and look at the same place, and to our horror, it is also 2 tw5 test, which is a real nuisance. But I think from the browser's point of view is probably, looks reasonable, because to them everything on a file URI probably does look like it belongs in the same domain.
But you have that. If it is that mechanism, then you have the same problems which were introduced with the cookies.
Yes.
So that if you have two different users which use the same computer and the file URI, you probably have different passwords, but in this case you don't.
And that's why it's okay to use the mechanism for TiddlySpot, because with TiddlySpot usually you're not on the file URI, you're on the HTTP URI of the TiddlySpot site.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
But it's so I think that everything that I've described would need to be disabled by default, and just enabled as part of. We'd need to move TiddlySpot into a plugin, I think, actually.
Yeah.
And then make that extra configuration be part of the plugin.
Yeah.
So we'll try and get that done. I think quite early on we got TiddlyWiki to the point where it worked well with TiddlySpot, and I think that's been really, really worthwhile, because when you look at all the community stuff that's grown up around TiddlyWiki 5, it's pretty much all on TiddlySpot at the moment. So I'm keen to, and one of the, besides publishing stuff, the other primary motivation for using TiddlySpot is so that multiple people can work on the same thing. So I'm very keen to get that working. The little question I had was about how you're finding the new permaview behavior. So the concerns that I have here is particularly whether I've got the default right. So over here in advanced settings, we've got fine control over over this stuff. But the question is whether the defaults are confusing. And I worry that a user visits tiddlywiki.com and then before they know it, they've got a URL that's complicated looking gobbledygook to most people.
Mm.
It's interfering with the default tiddlers as well, and that's confusing, I think.
It's interfering with the
default tiddlers.
In the sense of if you've got default tiddlers but you visit the site with a URL that includes a story, then you don't get the default tiddlers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, so if I went into tiddlywiki.com now and changed the default tiddler so that hello there wasn't a default tiddler, for me, even when I press refresh, it's still going to display hello there again. And that's a tricky one because that is, of course, what the permaview functionality is intended to do.
Yeah, that's true, but I think it's maybe wise to put the default off.
Well, but the trouble with the default values that might make sense would be
Jeremy?
So we could either, switch it off entirely, so go back to the 5.011 behavior. Oh gosh, that's bad.
Jeremy, should it disable the browser history? So if I say Control H, then I should get no entry, or what does it disable in this case? Because I think with Firefox, with my configuration, there is no difference if I disable or enable it.
There's no difference if you enable or disable that setting.
Yeah. So in the browser history, I always, if I click a tiddler, I always get a new let's say a new link in the browser history. If I say Control H with Jeremy, Danielo and Paul joined again. So if you can should enable them.
Hi guys. Very slow switching you back. Okay, well I'll investigate that problem, Mario, with Firefox, but I think it's separate to the issue here. So Ton's suggesting that the default should be to, I guess, to not.
Jeremy.
Yeah.
I would also switch this permalink change in the URL. Would switch it off, and like you see it in forums or so, make a permalink button that copies it to the copy buffer or somehow, or moves it then to the URL or somehow.
Well, that was also Mario's suggestion as well, and it's of course it's not what we did in TiddlyWiki 5. And the trouble I have with it is, well, if we do that, it doesn't bias the navigation history. Where if we having that option to be able, so I'd see a lot of people when they sit down in front of a TiddlyWiki, click on a link to a tiddler and then click the back button, and they expect to go back to the first tiddler they were on. And that seems like that's, although I don't believe it should be the default, it seems like an important thing to offer.
Yes, I agree.
Whereas, you see, if all we do is display the link in a pop-up, then and we don't actually set the link, then browser history doesn't get affected. But I mean, Tom, to go a bit deeper, the concerns, and Stefan, I mean, I can see one concern is just that the URL ends up looking complicated. Is that the concern that you have, or is it more about how if the user ends up with another concern would be when the user's navigated around a bit, pressing refresh doesn't have the expected action of taking you back to the top, so to speak. Is that the concern?
I think so, yeah, the last what you said.
So,
I think what one concern is also if you close all tiddlers except one. Tiddler, can you do this?
Yeah.
So close all and then open one again. And now if you send this link, but only the first part, not with the colon. Yeah, only the first part. And now if you open this in a new browser, then you get all the default tiddlers there plus the one you linked.
Yeah, and
I think
that's being done deliberately. So the motivation there is that if you are just providing a link to a target tiddler and not specifying a story, that we should use the default tiddlers. So the hope is that that means that the tiddler that you ask to see, that you're seeing it in context, because you're seeing the default stuff as well. And if that's not what you want, then you can specify the context that you do want in the URL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think this is confusing because with TiddlyWiki Classic we are used to the links in a different way. So maybe this may be a
okay, but I mean, reverting to TiddlyWiki Classic behavior isn't entirely an option because the motivation for the changes here is to unify permalinks and permaview, so that in TiddlyWiki Classic we have to explain to people separately what a permalink is and what a permaview is, and the UI for getting to them is different and their behavior is different. So what we're trying to do here is to harmonize them so that you can seamlessly use the URL both as a permaview and a permalink. And I think that's a good thing to do because permaviews are incredibly valuable because they let people exchange a sequence of tiddlers. So exchanging a story, I really like that.
Maybe you can remember at the very beginning when you introduced this into the master branch, we had a discussion.
Yeah.
And at the end, so at the beginning I had some issues, and then at the end with some changes, I'm perfectly fine with the mechanism now. Because I made some changes so that the browser title gets updated, so my real browser history gets a title and all this stuff. And that's the setting I'm using, so I'm perfectly fine with the behavior.
No, I think everybody on this call should be so configurable. The question of the defaults is more for tiddlywiki.com, I think. I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody who was going to add something.
Danielo?
I think it was me. I was checking the microphone. But I think I don't understand where's the problem with this history links. I mean, this is now some problematic in my opinion.
So you don't have a problem with the current behavior?
No, I don't have any actually. I like the default behavior of opening the default tiddlers plus the extra tiddler that just specified, and if you want to specify a 13 sequence, you can do it, right? You can specify only the tiddlers that you want to be opened.
And at that point, Mario's concern is that it's complex to understand enough about what's going on to be able to get the effect that you want. Well, I don't propose to change anything at the moment, but I would emphasize that I'm open to making changes to the defaults before we get out of beta.
Maybe I tried to remember why when I noticed this long URLs first time, and at that time I wanted to give someone a link to one specific tiddler on tiddlywiki.com. And I had an awful long URL. I didn't want to do anything there because I had to search what I want to link him to. What I missed there is a close other tiddlers button.
Yeah.
So in the tiddler that I wanted to send, either I need a permalink button there or a close the other tiddlers button.
I think a permalink in the information tab will be a nice addition here. To just open that tiddler.
I mean, in fact, Stephan, for future reference, you don't need to do a close others. All you need to do is to navigate to the tiddler that you want to link to, but then when you copy the URL, take it from before that first colon. And then you just get the tiddler that you most recently navigated to.
Yeah, plus the default tiddlers. And in most cases, that's not what I want. So I always have to construct a link.
This little issue is something that can be fixed separately. Yeah, I mean we could default to an empty story in the situation where we get a startup URL like that.
What if you put the same tiddler twice?
Yeah, but then it works.
Then it would work as expected. But I would buy Mario's concern that
if you have the colon only, will it also work?
Well, as in the colon before a story.
No, just the link and then the colon, or something like this.
I was thinking in that also.
Like that.
If you say hash,
at the moment it doesn't distinguish. It certainly could. If the colon was included, it could take that as a marker that it should go with a blank story. Here it is. So yeah, it would be some messing around here. It would take a tiny bit of restructuring to do it.
But wouldn't it be easier to add a permalink for one tiddler into the info area?
Yeah, I agree.
And then I just say copy paste and I'm good to go. So
yes, I'm not against doing that. The reason why I didn't include the that at the moment is just because it's not actually very convenient to do right now. I mean, you'll have seen here where that guy isn't a link, and the reason why that guy isn't a link is because it's we don't have the right primitives to construct a link.
This is not the problem. It can be text. So I use this link a lot. So this is perfectly fine. So you can have a link to the static page, and the second line should be a link to the to one tiddler only.
Well, it can't be here because this sources tab is specific to the TW5 wiki. So it is an issue that we need to find somewhere else for it. But here would be a reasonable place.
Okay, yeah, somewhere.
One other really annoying thing that I'd only just noticed since I got back is the new vertical tabs don't work in Safari, which means that they don't work on the iPad either. So on Safari you get this. And it is because I hadn't realized that the Flexbox, which is this relatively recent CSS feature that I use for the vertical tabs, has a different syntax on Safari. But I will come back and fix that.
I thought, can I use, I think the Internet Explorer has a prefix, MS, something like this?
Yes, I haven't tested on IE, but I think IE 11 is prefixless.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, yes, this IE 10 has a prefix. At the moment, the status of things is that I'm really happy when things do work on IE 10, but I'm not really going to much effort to fix things when they don't work on 10. And that's really because 11 is obviously the first, what's the word, adequately HTML5 compatible version. But yes, it's this guy is the problem.
Okay.
So permaview and permatabs then. Jeremy's gonna explore colon without story. Okay. Is everybody ready to move on?
About the Node.js, I have a question, a couple of questions. Does the web application works as the Node original version?
Not sure if you're. Is the Node version of TiddlyWiki 5 the same as the version that runs in the browser?
Not actually. I mean, the version of TiddlyWiki that runs under Node.js, it's the same that you can run in the TiddlyDesktop, for example.
Oh, I see. TiddlyDesktop can at the moment TiddlyDesktop can only run standalone TiddlyWiki files. You can't run the Node.js edition of TiddlyWiki under TiddlyDesktop.
I think I saw something about that. Is there any project or example?
An example of what?
Of a Node running as an application with all the options or features that the native Node version have.
So when you run the single file version of TiddlyWiki in TiddlyDesktop, it runs in a sandbox, and it does not have access. It does not have direct access to the Node.js features that node-webkit provides. Instead, there's a wrapper application that really is TiddlyDesktop itself that provides those services to the hosted TiddlyWiki files.
But I mean, what if you want to construct, for example, an application, a native application using Node desktop with TiddlyWiki? Can I expect the same power than I have with Node.js?
Yes, but that's a configuration. What you described there is a configuration that isn't TiddlyDesktop. That's
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that's talking about there is an option that's documented in on tiddlywiki.com where you can take the node-webkit, download node-webkit itself, and then just drop into it the index.html file that comprises TiddlyWiki. And if you run it in that mode, then yes, you get this rather peculiar hybrid where the TiddlyWiki file believes it's on a browser, but also has access to the Node APIs. And it's a very interesting configuration.
And the security problem.
Exactly, it's not suitable for as a general purpose way of working with TiddlyWiki documents. It's a way of turning a TiddlyWiki wiki into a standalone application.
Yeah, I was thinking about the more about that and standalone application.
It's really interesting. It's a really interesting area. I mean, Windows for a while has had this ability to make I can't remember what it used to be called, but you used to be able to display an HTML file in a box on the desktop in Windows.
The HTA?
Yes, and all that. Which I've always really liked that stuff, that kind of a tight integration between the web and the desktop. And yeah, node-webkit gives us it back. So the other topic I was thinking about was something else that came up in the groups, which is this thing VexTab. So VexTab is a JavaScript library that allows you to type stuff, such as in these green boxes here, and shows that I can't. There we go. And it dynamically updates musical notation. It's generated with Canvas. Let me see if I can add another note without. Yeah, there we go. And I'm not sure. How do you do a flat? I can see how you do a sharp. Lowercase b. I don't know. Anyway, there was a bit of interest in this in the group. Paul, I think you play the guitar, don't you? I had it in my mind, but perhaps not. So the question was, could we integrate that into TiddlyWiki? And somewhere. Right, here we go. This is the code, and in here, this is the code of a playground application that just shows how the library works. And you can see that we initiate a renderer object, and we point it there. It's being pointed at a canvas. So a bit further down here, we've got canvas ID equals boot in the body. So that's we're wrapping a render object around that. That configures it with an artist. Not entirely sure what that means. I think it's to do with the size of it. And then there's a render function which gets called repeatedly on key up. And you can see it makes some API calls, but notably, oh, excuse me, 1 second, I was going to have to mute.
In the meanwhile, does anyone have experience porting JavaScript libraries to be used by TiddlyWiki 5?
Which libraries?
I was thinking in what table or some table based on jQuery libraries.
So TiddlyWiki doesn't work very well with jQuery, because at the moment there is no jQuery. It handles all the rendering in a very different way, so you can't use jQuery libraries.
Okay.
So
I thought it used jQuery in the background.
Yes, it's TiddlyWiki Classic, but not
Okay.
TiddlyWiki 5. Not TiddlyWiki 5. Because TiddlyWiki 5 does its rendering on its own, and does all the refreshing because of an internal structure, and then it does the rendering, and jQuery doesn't work well with it.
Oh, sorry, I'm back after that interruption. Forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Tom. Mario.
Mario. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think it sounds like you were just explaining the bits that I'd skipped over there a bit, Mario.
There was just a question. Danielo asked if we have experience with, let's say, third-party libraries,
right?
jQuery stuff with
So
TiddlyWiki 5.
So this, well, where I'm going with this is that actually, as it happens, VexTab has a particularly convenient API to wrap up for TiddlyWiki 5. So I think it makes quite an interesting example of a third-party library to wrap up.
And I think does it need jQuery? I don't think so.
I don't
just for only
think the
getting the
library
diffs.
itself necessarily does. I don't know actually. That's a good point. Let's download this repo and see.
Okay, I have to mute for some time.
No worries. Okay, so yes, it does. It absolutely does use jQuery within the library, assuming that.
Most of these kind of things use jQuery in the background.
Well, it's much more fashionable now as pure JavaScript libraries, which actually don't, and things like D3 and so on go to some trouble to let you use jQuery. Actually, it turns out no, I was wrong. It's it looks like VexFlow itself does not use jQuery. No, I don't think it does. Raphael, neither. So it's using underscore. Something is using underscore. It's not too clear.
There is a jQuery.js file.
Yes, indeed. But the so it is being used by. If we go back to the HTML file that we were looking at, which is playground, we can see that it is including jQuery. But the point is, which of the JavaScript files that we're using uses it. And so looking at, you can see tabdiv.js is being included. So when I looked at tabdiv, I can see here that that does use jQuery. But what I'm seeing is that the other parts, that the other included files do not appear to use jQuery. So that's very common. That it's often. I was searching for that.
It's from many years ago. I may be wrong.
It's not a flawless way of doing it, but it looks to me as if it's using $ for something else. Those don't look to me like jQuery calls. But that is to say, would be very much the fashion these days is for libraries intended for reuse to be very minimal in their dependencies. I mean, jQuery is still one huge monster, even though I understand that they've done a great deal to try and reduce it. But you know my views. I hate jQuery. I think it never solved. I mean, the only problem that it solved in reality was ironing out incompatibilities between browsers, and in the process it brought in a programming model and a way of thinking about DOM programming that I think was unhelpful.
Borked.
Well, I don't buy chaining. Chaining is syntactic sugar, and in a few places it makes sense. But jQuery, it pushes chaining as if it had only just discovered it, and rather relentlessly applies it all over the place. It also originally it used to really break the DOM. It, for instance, didn't distinguish between properties and attributes. And that was really annoying. So, jQuery, it's as if jQuery looks at the DOM and says, oh, that's way too complicated, let's make it simpler, and then, catastrophically simplifies out some of the details that you actually need. So I always felt jQuery was a slightly naive expression of what's needed. more of a fan of underscore, but I still mostly try and survive without using any of these things. So anyway, where I was going with this was that it would be quite fun to wrap up VexTab as a demo of wrapping up an external library for TiddlyWiki, and thought maybe it's something we could even do during a Hangout, because if I do a little bit of prep for it, I think we can do a lot of the coding live, and that might be quite helpful for others to to be able to give us an opportunity to discuss what needs to be done. But we'd certainly need to figure out some of these dependency issues. Okay, so I brought that up now, but in fact, I don't think we've really got time to do it today, because I've only got about half an hour until I've got to go. Any other topics from anybody here? A resounding no.
Yeah, that was just one of the questions that I wanted to do. If we can, there's any way to use jQuery, and maybe just with the library you want to integrate. But I'm afraid that the answer is no. Right?
No, you can absolutely use jQuery if you want to within TiddlyWiki. So there's a couple of issues really that if you look at something like if you look at the Code Mirror plugin, the Code Mirror plugin includes within the plugin the actual JavaScript files. And that's quite handy, because it means that, so in here there's where is it, codemirror.js. So that file is turned into a tiddler as part of the build process. And that's really handy, because it means that CodeMirror works offline. The case of jQuery, though, if one had a plugin, so if one was writing a plugin that used jQuery, you could use exactly the same technique to embed jQuery within your plugin. But the trouble at that point then is that every plugin that used jQuery with that technique would have to carry its own copy of it. So the two options that make sense, I think, is either plugin authors include jQuery in the conventional way with a script tag pointing to the jQuery CDN, and then the browser will resolve attempts to load the same script more than once. Or we establish a standard TiddlyWiki core plugin that wraps up jQuery so that it can be reused. And that's probably a reasonable option, I think, if it turns out that there's lots of plugins that want to use jQuery. And then obviously end users would be able to, because if you do have multiple plugins using jQuery, you then got versioning issues that you might need to experiment with running different versions of jQuery. You might not be able to go with the latest jQuery upgrade on one or other of the libraries.
It can become a mess easily, but I think that having the opportunity, the option, would be a good thing.
Well, we could actually do this a little.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah.
Let me. So let's go down this road then of creating a jQuery plugin. So I'm starting by copying.
You're gonna have to start just doing, the bottom edge and let it grow out some, because you got good coverage.
Yeah, it's just
Paul, it sounds like you might need to mute.
Oh no, I mean it was a good land. I don't know how long.
Paul, you might need to mute.
It changes colors once it gets.
Okay, Paul, I've muted you. Okay, so I've created a folder called jQuery, and I'm going to remove the code mirror files from it. And now we need to go and get a copy of jQuery. I guess there's an immediate issue as to the old version or the new version. I assume these days that it's probably the 1.x version that we should be using.
No, 2.
2.
I think so, yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
Compress production. Okay, that one will do. Ding ding. And so now I'm going to save that. In there. That looks all right. Then we can get rid of a few other files that are stuck in here.
Title.
Oh, that should be good. Right.
Why jQuery? Leave jQuery?
Well, that's the name of the plugin. And within that plugin, we're including library stuff that's unmodified. So that was the thought. I mean, it could be that, but to make it that would break the existing convention that there's a plugin name that's separate from the file name.
Okay, I'm horrible giving names, so I agree with you.
Well, you know what they say, it's the hardest problem in computer science. So.
Here we go. Okay.
So now what I'm thinking, let me just check one little thing. Yeah. So this is typical Jeremy. I'd forgotten the syntax for specifying a prefix and a suffix on the file. So these fields allow us to add arbitrary strings to the top and bottom of the jQuery file. Now I'm assuming the jQuery automatically assigns to $, but I'm not sure. So let's try that. So I'm going to update the TW5 edition to include the jQuery plugin. And build it. And it immediately complained because it's trying to run jQuery.js on the server. Isn't that hilarious? So to work around that, we've made it be a startup module, and we need to make it tell the world that it's a startup module that only needs to run in the browser. And to do that, we can look at an existing startup module, and we'll copy its configuration. So at the moment we'll have to put that here. Okay, and it's still trying to run. Oh yeah. We better just have a quick look at the uncompressed jQuery code just to see how it's booting itself up. Yeah, I'm going to have to do some more messing around to make that work, so I'm not going to. I should. I think this might be the second time that I've started down the line of trying to do something live during a Hangout and then realised that it makes a terrible spectacle for everybody else. So my apologies. I will stop suggesting that because I think it is rather inevitable we run into those problems.
I missed was what Danielo wanted to achieve with jQuery.
The question here was, can I write a plugin that uses jQuery? And so my answer was yes, and a plugin can embed jQuery in the same way that the CodeMirror plugin embeds the CodeMirror library. But then I was raising the point that if one had a bunch of plugins that wished to use jQuery, then it might be useful if TiddlyWiki made jQuery available as a reusable plugin, but by virtue of loading the plugin, it would define $, and enable.
I think the way jQuery programs work doesn't fit very well with the mechanism TiddlyWiki uses, because in normal cases.
That's the second point, of course. Yes. Yeah.
Because in normal cases with jQuery, you create something like a list, and then you modify the DOM. To make, let's say, a table out of the list, and that's not compatible, in my opinion, with the way TiddlyWiki works.
No, indeed. It's you could only use it in certain contexts, and in fact, you probably run into problems on the server because of the way that we use the fake DOM, which will probably confuse the hell out of jQuery.
Yeah. Well, the main thing is jQuery is required by some other libraries that are useful sometimes. Yes,
indeed. And so, if to the extent that they expose an interface that we can reuse, Mario's point is almost, well, it's not exactly philosophical. It's a sort of practical point that the jQuery idioms don't really work in TiddlyWiki, which is quite true.
All right.
Just because jQuery programmers, they're used to keeping state in the DOM, and we can't do that.
There are many libraries which use, for example, the data binding to the DOM elements, and this is immediately broken if you work with TiddlyWiki 5.
Yes, indeed, and I mean happily broken with things like Angular as well.
Yeah.
Although Angular breaks jQuery in a really interesting way. Angular, some of what it puts in the DOM is HTML comments to store state information. And jQuery gets very confused by comments and makes unwarrantable assumptions about comments. And the Angular guys are saying, well, that's jQuery's fault, and a million jQuery programmers are saying, I don't get whose fault it is, please fix it.
Yeah, there has been a very long discussions with JSON, the JSON definition and comments in a JSON definition, and yeah, this is like it started the flame war.
Yes. Well, I completely understand why there aren't comments in JSON. And
yeah, because people are using comments to storing state information, and this is broken. Yeah. Okay, but yeah.
So, last few minutes then. One thing that happened. Did it happen? I think it happened in between the various Hangouts. But we had this article published in a Swiss newspaper.
Yeah, I've read it. It's very interesting. Very well done.
Yes, I was really impressed. I mean, even just relying on Google Translate for it, it seemed like he'd understood what was going on. And the thing that made me really happy is I've never heard of this newspaper, obviously, but it appears to be a national newspaper in Switzerland. And so they must have some criteria of newsworthiness for what they cover. And the thing I really liked is they seem to be saying that what's newsworthy about TiddlyWiki is that it's not a centralized service. And that's obviously exactly the message that I would like people to take away from TiddlyWiki. So I couldn't be more pleased about that.
Should we ask them if we are allowed to translate it?
I can use amazing technology to translate it seamlessly.
Yeah, but the content is
I'm joking. It would be nice to have a proper translation of it, and whether they need to be asked, yes, I imagine they probably do, don't they?
Yeah, if you want to republish it, yes.
But I think you could post a translation to the discussion group without stomping on their fair use rights, I think.
Yeah.
But I really like the way.
Would it be interesting? So if it would be worth the effort?
Oh, I think it would be worth the effort. I would hugely appreciate it.
With all of the recent scare, really, about online sites and passwords, and I changed my eBay password the other day. Yeah, TiddlyWiki right now has an opportunity that's kind of shining. I mean, the door is wide open at the moment, especially if, and this is like totally independent of I'm just kind of like blue sky at the moment. I have no idea what efforts are ongoing, especially if there was some sorts of means to encode tiddlers like into the files in an encrypted fashion.
That's built into TiddlyWiki 5, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I kind of had guessed that there had been some work going along those lines, but to focus on that and to show people, look, not only is this your data that's only yours and only here and only on that file and only in this browser window right now, but when it gets laid down on file, it's encoded, so it's not only yours and only here, but it's only visible once you've rendered it.
Yeah, I think those are absolutely the timely characteristics of TiddlyWiki. So I mean, and hence my excitement really, because they saw that without me needing to tell them. Well, I mean, without me telling them beyond what it says on tiddlywiki.com, which is really cool. And I really like.
I'm just looking at it like right now may be the time to actually start, banging the pots and pans more.
I'm banging the pots and pans
the security side
as much as I can. I mean, if there's any more pot bashing to be done, I'm always open to suggestions. But look, no, I was going to just point out some that all of this is happening against a number of other things in the same direction. So there's a guy started this indie phone project that is an attempt to build, from the ground up a phone that embodies these same principles. Well, really anti-principles. A phone that's not owned by Apple and Google, he's gone on to create this manifesto for independent technology. So I quite like the terminology. I think the word independent is pretty good for what we provide, for what TiddlyWiki is providing in this context. The manifesto makes its points about corporate surveillance. Interestingly, using a slightly Tiddly-esque thing going on there. And the free and open, absolutely. I think that it's impossible to have a tool that people can use independently unless it is free and open. That, very strongly agree with. I'm not so sure that we have the same understanding of design-led. I think here he means visual design, whereas to me the sense in which TiddlyWiki is led by design is not its visual design, it's the design for what TiddlyWiki's information metaphor, this idea that there's a data model that takes what people have learned about spreadsheets, gives them a data model that's a bit more flexible, and to me that is design. Whereas I think here this is about slightly different vantage point for the same concerns.
Thanks for sharing that.
It's quite interesting. I was reading some funny sentences. Our products have beautiful defaults, which is pretty good. I'm not sure that I would say that, but that I'd say it in those words. But I'd agree with that, and I'd certainly agree with that. Encryption and security, people say, it cannot be an afterthought, and that's why encryption in TiddlyWiki 5 was in there long before it was practical to use it for anything else. And I've shown you before, there's things like no backend, which is a more sort of technically oriented movement to try to highlight the possibilities of writing apps that don't have a backend. So I think there's a few, and Hoodie, have you seen? Hoodie is a offline first architecture, as they call it. Offline first is yet another sort of campaigning thing. So there's quite a bit of movement in this area, I think. And TiddlyWiki is fortunate in that it's been able to boast all of these qualities for 10 years now. But it's very cool that they're becoming. Other people are recognizing them. And so to be clear here, then, I think there's two things going on here. There's this technical perspective of being able to operate offline, which TiddlyWiki has, and then I think allied to that, because of that, there's these concerns about independence. And so these, the Hoodie movement and the indie tech movement, I think, are very separate. But it's TiddlyWiki is squarely in the middle of them both. Exciting times. Mm-hmm. A concern actually, therefore, is whether what I can do to verify the security of TiddlyWiki's encryption, which it turns out, of course, is very little, not being a cryptographer. But hopefully, that's where that comes back in. By making TiddlyWiki and its encryption open, we make it independently verifiable. So we're drawing to. Oh, let me unscreen share. Drawing to the end of the time that I've got this week, but planning another Hangout as usual next week, and hopefully now for the rest of the summer we'll continue with the usual weekly schedule. And guys, thank you very much for joining me. We'll say goodbye and wave, and then I'll press the stop broadcast button and we can continue to chat in private for a few minutes. But guys, thank you very much for your time. So great session. Much appreciate you giving up your time this afternoon. Bye.
Bye.